So great afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's very exciting to see everyone here again. And the topic I want to address today is scaling trustless coordination. I want to explain why coordination problem is actually the problem of next era and why Stack Hunt is a new game we see. What kind of necessary infrastructure we will need for those kind of games. So I think a lot of projects here might sound a bit self-pitching, and I hope that what I'm going to talk about today is more interesting and more fun in general for people to listen. So the first thing I want to talk about is globalization, because globalization is arguably the highest possible level of coordination so far we have witnessed in human history. So globalization can date back earliest to the 15th century. You can see this is an ancient trade route. And people use shells and tasks as currencies for a while. And that's the earliest version of globalization we ever have. But for the past few decades of years, globalization turns to be more about coordination at scale. So you see here for a 787 airplane, you have to have global coordination to make this plane to fly on the sky, right? So in modern times, globalization is about coordination. In the past a few years, I think since 2015, we started to hear more about words like globalization and deglobalization. You can see here, the Economist article have its cover entitled as this, and it says, globalization has an impact on the future of global commerce. Now, I personally think that this characterization of global commerce actually misses something deeper, because globalization then sounds simply as a mere slowdown of global trade flows or capital flows. But I think the bigger issue here is that you have a diminishing or undermined global coordination capacity, where people are no longer working together, and rather they just stay individualistic and stay independent. So this is the real problem we see today, that the coordination is regressing, and people are simply having a degenerated version of civilization. And that is why I am never personally proud to be called or to be known as a degen in the crypto world. I'm not sure if other people think in a similar way. So therefore, as a result, I think almost the cost of everything in my life, from food to energy to cheap, the price just goes up, right? The inflation, the CPIs are just being horrible. And I think this is a necessary result of deglobalization or lack of coordination, because supply chains are getting fragmented and redundancy have to replace efficiency, and simply scale economies are disappearing. So some people may think, and I think that's totally understandable agenda, that we can still live quite well off under protectionism or more tariffs, right? I understand that trade war maybe don't affect people that much because simply some of people here can just afford that. But if you try to think about the world's biggest challenges, like we're still facing so far, like the top 5 challenges. For instance, the malnutrition. We have malnutrition not because we don't have enough food, but we have failed channels to distribute this food. And climate change, it's a textbook global coordination problem. The global pandemics, as you observe with COVID-19, coordination and synchronization can determine the outcomes. Or inequality, which is caused by uneven access to coordinated systems such as welfare system, and warfare or geopolitical fragmentation where coordination just collapsed and trust just got broken. So if you look at all those problems, you should always remind yourself, none of those are resource problems, right? Again, if you look at this slide here, for malnutrition facts, you have enough food to feed 3 billion people, but this amount of food is just wasted. So this is not a resource problem. This is a coordination problem, right? And coordination just turns to be the actual centric issue of almost every issue. And even we have to talk about emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. Like all of us would think multiple agent AI systems are more valuable or promising than a single large language model, simply because AI agents might be able to align and commit and work with each other under uncertainties. More specifically, we think the coordination problem here is Stag Hunt. So Stag Hunt is a game that encourages coordination. It's a classic game in the game theory. It illustrates the tension between safety and coordination. So unlike the prisoner's dilemma, where it tells people, you shouldn't coordinate, and that gives you the optimal outcome, this one asks people to cooperate to get the optimal strategy. So the two players might have different things to do. The first thing is that they can hunt a stack together, which will give them this 3 and 3, which is a better payoff. This is, an efficient payoff, but it's just more fragile. Or they can choose to hunt a hare alone. So each of them will get a 1-1 payoff. And this is a suboptimal, but actually safe equilibrium. And unfortunately, if one party chooses to cooperate and the other party chooses not to cooperate, so if one party wants to hunt for the stag and another party wants to hunt for the hunt for the hare, then unfortunately, the party that cooperate will get nothing, but the party that hunt for the hare will get something. So as you can see here, the core problem for this game is not really about incentives, right? Because you do get net positive incentives for either of these outcomes. It's non-negative. It's either 0 or 1 or 2 or 3. So this is not an incentive problem. But the problem here is that you have uncertainty about what others will do. You don't know about others' actions. So this is the problem where rational players may just think of staying with a safer option simply because this is less risky, even though there are better outcomes that exist. So therefore, I think the problem we ask today is if we have a way to drive people from the suboptimal outcomes to the point of efficiency. And unfortunately, we think the internet today or the technology today doesn't really help us achieve that. So I understand some people might think, right, that we have coordination today, and the internet gives us better connectivity, and therefore the coordination problem is solved. Unfortunately, we argue the opposite. We think the internet today basically does nothing, but it gives us connections, but not coordinations. It amplifies people's voices, but not alignment, right? In general, we think it restores people to the status of being independent and atomic, individualistic, isolated decision makers, and people no longer think of coordination. Coordination is just having so much precondition as requirements. For example, the common knowledge or low coordination cost or enforcement mechanisms. But in general, among those, we think the most important is credible commitments. The Kaspa founder had a similar opinion expressed in his recent talk in Oxford. So basically, credible commitment is the most important thing because without credible commitment, agreements are simply cheap talk, right? So, everyone would just be waiting for everyone else to move first, and coordination just turns to become far riskier. And in here, I want to encourage people in this venue to think about their own experience, right? If you use your imagination and recall from experience of trading meme tokens and coins, that whether or not we are becoming more and more natural or comfortable to call us as, PvP players, and whether or not we actually have a productive environment for co-builders. In the end of the day, we realize that we are locked ourselves in a net loss game because simply we are trying to get money from other people. So there's no coordination in here. One possible solution to this is a coordination market. What does that mean? It means that there's three critical things that are done. Firstly, that turns expectations into observations where people can price in their actions. And secondly, it embeds conditional participation, which is, if you do something, then we'll do something with you. And this solves the problem of simultaneity. And lastly, that this introduces economic exposure. So participants are now financially committed. So I argue that at least this creates a minimum form of soft, credible environment. And we think this is something really powerful, even beyond crypto and finance, because now you can coordinate to adopt new standards or for collective actions, for example, maybe even going on a protest march, or those you need coordination. And these are all have to be guaranteed by on-chain promises and conditionals. And this is why this solution is so important for us to achieve coordination. Now, the last part of this problem is that there's a hard constraint that the coordination market actually needs. It will only work if you have a market that can process information and reach consensus in real time. So right now, right now, the crypto world is split into two divisions. On one hand, you have systems like Zcash and Ethereum that have rather strong decentralization claims. But these systems have difficulty with real-time finality. Sometimes it takes minutes or even hours to achieve. On the other side, Sometimes you have systems like Solana that achieves real-time performance. But those are with weaker decentralization assumptions. And sometimes they just go out of service when they're trying to be decentralized. So we are facing a direct comparative or trade-off between decentralization and efficiency. And for coordination market, unfortunately, it requires both. It requires both real-time coordination and decentralization. And here's an example for you to understand why. So earlier this year, that the MSCI index say, OK, they are considering to remove MicroStrategy from this index. And obviously, this is something that will affect the price of Bitcoin and necessarily affects the price of your position in a liquidity pool in for example, right? So imagine you are part of this internet money. Basically, put the money on chain, and we call it internet money. And you want to do a few things, right? So you want to delegate your money to Power, to the sequencer. And then you want this money to be read in real time. So if actually MSCI kicked it out of the index, then you can react immediately, right? You want to sell your Bitcoin, and therefore you get a better investment opportunity or a better outcome. And then you can rebalance your position in the pool, and this is very important for your strategy. Now, the problem with the previous mentioned systems is that they don't give you real-time confirmation. And you can only get that signal, for example, 30 minutes or 3 hours later, because only then the signal is confirmed. And therefore, it means that as time accumulates, risk also accumulates. You lose your trading opportunity, and therefore the entire coordination will just collapse. So the counterfactual we offer you here is that, for instance, in Kaspa, we have real-time decentralization and confirmation. So you can see that it generates 10 blocks per second. And every time if there is a block or a miner or a node says, OK, the decision is to exclude, or the decision is not to exclude, and you can read that immediately. And that's why you can put yourself in a confidence interval of making decisions. And that's why we call this real-time decentralized decisions. So the other proposition we have today is that real-time decentralization cannot be entailed by proof-of-stake system by nature. The reason for that is this tension is structural. Because for proof-of-stake, the finality is achieved by confirming with the staked votes, right? And the more decentralized the staked vote distribution is, it takes more time to get that kind of supermajority. So the supermajority has to be about more than 2/3 oftentimes. And that can be a really, a huge bottleneck. So this is a comparison between trying to believe in the stake in the votes of POS systems or believing the hardware you have in the proof-of-work systems. The argument we have is that for proof of work, it samples the hardware space without requiring the protocol to explicitly collect evidence from the majority of miners. So it doesn't really matter if you have to sample already a majority of miners, but rather every miner you sample offers you a statistical proof that it outcompetes the full network's computing power, and therefore that's why it's a convincing proof. So for this precise reasons, Ethereum researchers try to introduce things like rotating committees and so on, but I will not elaborate on there. The second example for you to understand this is moving to a superior new DeFi. So let's say if we want to move from BNB to Kaspa, it's just an imaginary case. So let's say there's a better DeFi protocol, but people are concerned, right? No one wants to move first, because for now you have maybe like 50 or 5 billion on BNB. And you say, hey, if I move there, there's no players or no liquidity on Kaspa. I don't want to move there myself. So you want to say, hey, if there's another big player, let's move to Kaspa or move to a new DeFi system, then I will move there as well. So I will move after it reaches like 2 billion market cap or 3 billion, and then everyone can follow the other one. And at the same time, this capital stays productive on BNB until the subset thresholds is well achieved. So this is what we mean by this allows people to drive from suboptimal points to the point of efficiency. And very quickly, I think there's also a side issue about economic weight. So think about this as a problem of proof-of-stake system. So let's say if Ethereum has a market cap of 10 billion, right, just a random number. And if I have a check size of 100 billion, so if I want to say I want to send this 100 billion, let's say, stable coin on Ethereum network, the simple question I want to ask is how many or how much is the value economically that is staked in this system or protocol itself to secure my transactions, right? So the vote itself provides a strong confirmation. But it also can convince me that things are probably safe, but only the weight of this entire stake provides an overwhelming guarantee. So that's another difference for proof of work, where each confirmation is not just an estimate of probabilities. It's a direct proof of work. That is why for proof of work, you can only fork the chain. You cannot really roll back and cancel or withdraw the transactions that are done. So to close this, oh, by the way, this is also the chart saying, hey, if there are 95.5% of the nodes or people are trying to participate in this new DeFi protocol, then maybe I should move there as well. And again, this initializes very important progressive steps for people to join in new and more optimal solutions. So to close this off, the argument we present to you today is that the problem for the last 75 years of the century is the coordination problems. And we have to have scaling trustless coordination. That is a system that solves credible commitment at scale. And we argue Kaspa is the one that offers you scalable, decentralized consensus in real time that is actually providing this value to push us to the next era of civilization. Thank you very much.